all of these pieces, like you don't have to discard it. You're not imperfect. You're enough. You're still good. And there's ways that you can to kind of build the pieces and put them back together in a way, and that beauty will come because of the work that you're doing to put the pieces back together. And when it's done, you'll look back and it's like, whoa, it was a beautiful struggle. I just love that terminology of just this beautiful struggle, and beauty did come in the midst of this broken thing, because the fracturing is not hidden, right? The rupture is not hidden at all. It's still there, but it's the whole together is just this really beautiful thing.
Welcome to Spark Joy, the podcast dedicated to celebrating the KonMari method and the transformative power of surrounding yourself with joy and letting go of all the rest. With your hosts and certified KonMari consultants, Kristen Ivy and Karen Sochi. And now, here's the show.
Our guest today is Lanecia Rouse Tinsley. She is an abstract expressionistic artist whose work includes photography, painting, teaching, writing, and speaking. She is the owner, creator of LARArt Studio and works out of Studio D at Hardy Nance Streets Studios in Houston, Texas. In addition to her work as an artist, Lanecia partners with Holy Family Houston, serving as their artist in residence, as a spiritual director and consultant for the Arts for Project Curate. I discovered Lanecia when I was exploring the Japanese philosophy of Wabi Sabi and the related art forms. Wabi Sabi is an ancient Japanese philosophy that honors the imperfect, the humble, and the handmade, the impermanent. It seeks to embrace the beauty found in the changing of seasons, things, nature, and our own lives. Lanecia has held workshops exploring the related art form of Kintsugi and has written about that experience on her blog. We see many parallels between KonMari and these ideas, and we are excited to learn more about her work and creativity. Welcome to Spark Joy.
Welcome, Lanecia.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Well, Lanecia, like many of our guests here at Spark Joy, you are inspired by a variety of life experiences, and that includes contemplative photography, painting, music, writing, theology, poetry, which is all like just so exciting. And, we're really interested in how you are focusing your teaching and working with others to explore creativity. And so we'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey and how you connect all of those different platforms, mediums, forms of study together in your artistry and your instruction.
Yes. So I came to art, journey-wise, I came to art in a very somewhat untraditional way. I did not study art in school. I was a sociology major and a theology major, and was in ministry for a number of years. But I was also the kid who was always curious about the arts. I loved singing and dancing. Did not think I had specific gifts for painting, but I was always intrigued by those who did and loved painting, and especially photography. And I think it was in 2010, I met a husband and wife, co-pastors here in Houston, who were starting an art project with men and women who were living on the streets. And and so it is a therapeutic art and economic empowerment project for men and women living outdoors, and then also creating space for people who are really just concerned with the cause, for empowering and helping people get off the street to come and also learn and create with the men and the women who were part of the project. And so they needed someone to come. They had the idea, but they needed someone to come and give it flesh. And initially I was like, no way, I don't do art. I'm a pastor. I was the kid who got a C, her first C in the 7th grade in art class. You don't want me. But they did, and the timing was just right for a professional transition. And so I packed up my little car and I moved to Houston, Texas, with just the things that could fit into my car. And I really didn't know anybody besides the pastors here in town, and embarked upon this journey that truly transformed my life. I started, yeah, I started learning and painting with the men and women in the project. I would shape these workshops with professional artists here in Houston. And sometimes I would sit at the back of the table and do the administrative work. And then every now and then I would set that aside and really sit and learn alongside of. And then there were also artists in the project who began to teach me some of their artistic knowledge and skills. And so some of the folks started teaching me how to paint as well. And it was in 2013, after experiencing a tragedy that caused my life to pause. Life was going on for everyone else, but I had my daughter prematurely, and she lived for 2 hours and 45 minutes and died resting upon my chest. And there
Oh my
was
gosh.
this grief breaking, if you will, that happened for me. And in that moment, I did pray a prayer of just, if I'm going to make it through this and not only survive, but thrive, then I need love to be really clear and to show up for me in the midst of me going through my grief. Because I knew from my experiences with the art projects and other people who had experienced tragedy and trauma, that the only way is through it. If you ignore it or avoid the pain and the brokenness, then you will never truly heal and to be able to survive. And I wanted to thrive, right? So I said, love, show up. And love showed up in people, in my relationships, in my partnership with my husband, Cleve, who was journeying with me every step of the way. Yet art, too, was an important part of that healing for me. And so I would paint on my floor some nights. I couldn't sleep, and I would just bring out watercolors and start painting cards. I had a bunch of cards that I was just creating with positive, uplifting quotes. And I started taking cups that I'd buy from the dollar store and drawing on them with Sharpies and creating these mugs. And art was just a way of me therapeutically kind of dealing with the heaviness and the grief that was in my heart. And art was big enough in some ways to hold my tears, and then also to hold my visions and hopes for what could be, because I knew that I wanted to live a joyful life. I wanted to have joy in my life again. And so art was just a part of that, of the things that that were gifted to me, I guess, in ways to get through. And once I went through my sabbatical and started going back to work, it was really hard for me in this new normal to do what I was doing before the breaking. And I told my husband, because during that grieving time, I made a dream list with him of things that would give me life. And one was getting a studio downtown and becoming a professional artist and making art that I would offer the world, but also curating spaces for other people to create. And so after a while, and I realized, and after going back, that it was time. I was no longer afraid of living my dream. I was more afraid of not. And so I took that leap and began this journey here in Houston as a professional artist. And I got that studio downtown and started making art and inviting other people in that space to experience the joy, the life, the healing, the respite that I found in the art making process. So that's how I got to where I am today. And around, yeah.
Wow, that is incredibly inspiring. And it sounds like art was a big support system for you and your community as well. That connection to all those the folks that you mentioned that helped you, move past that trauma and find your joy. And wow, and you had that dream list, so you also had a vision in mind for where you wanted to go and people in your life to support that. So that's just amazing. And it sounds like you've been traveling a lot, but you settled in on Houston. But travel ultimately plays a pretty significant role in your work as well. So could you just share a little bit about that too?
Yes, no, I love to travel. And I've, I guess in many ways, I feel like a nomad up until I moved to Houston and got married. And I think marriage is part of what has kept me from bouncing to a new city in ways, and planning some routes. But I love to travel and to encounter life, to encounter difference and beauty, and to learn more about. I think travel allows us to see ourselves in a different light, expands our imagination, of what is possible, um, to see things, to find beauty in ways that we may not notice in our everyday grind at home, in the things that are familiar. And so travel has definitely shaped my curiosity, has shaped my appreciation for the diversity that exists in our world. Um, and I try to work the stories of the places and encounters that I've had on my travels into my work in some way. And then my work practices also inspire me to. I always make dream lists every year of where do I want to go next year? You know, where's the next place I want to go? And it's been interesting to see how, and when you speak those things out into the universe, how opportunities come. I'd been wanting for 3 years to go to Paris. I'd lived in England before and had gone for a weekend, and but I wanted to go as an artist because at that time I was in ministry, and I knew that my eyes were different in the way I see, and and I spoke that out 3 years ago, and then 3 years later, an opportunity came for me to go with my husband and to encounter it through my artist's eyes. And so I'm just always just throwing out into the universe the dreams that I have, and hopes, and travel is definitely one of the things that are constantly on my list of places. Yeah. There's an aliveness, that happens when we get out of our everyday normal patterns.
For
And
sure. Yeah.
yeah, and I always feel like it just fuels me to come back and to love locally and love the people around me better. I feel like I'm a better human after I've spent some time away in a different place, a different setting. So yeah.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about how, before you never even saw yourself as an artist, and everything I hear you saying is like amazing to me that this was uncovered in you through not only people in your lives but circumstances. It's just amazing to me how many parallels I hear between your story and your way of looking at life and a lot of the concepts in KonMari. And in KonMari, we talk a lot about this, the first steps about breaking apart the existing arrangement of our clothing, for example, and then other items, as we go through the different steps of sorting and organizing in KonMari. And one of the ways that we do that is we pile up everything we own, everything that's in that particular category, and view them in a different way. And then we reorganize them in a way that brings us more joy and is a more useful way of maintaining those things. And to me, this seemed to be very similar to the art of Kintsugi, which is this idea of taking damaged pieces and making them more valuable and more beautiful and more interesting than the original through the art. And I'm really interested in learning about what drew you to that particular work.
Yes. So I was drawn to Kintsugi during my grieving process, actually, after the loss of our daughter. I spent a lot of time on Pinterest during that time because I think I was just seeking beauty too in ways, and Pinterest has some beautiful things. And one of an image that comes up often for those who like pottery and ceramics on Pinterest is the Kintsugi bowl. And I remember it popping up and reading the definition for it and thinking at that time it led to this really deep meditation, thinking about my grief and my own journey through it, and how not to, and almost like this encouragement motto for me to continue to go and to believe that there's beauty in struggle, that beauty can come. And so yeah, that's when it started to pique my curiosity, and then through that discovered other aspects of Japanese philosophy and aesthetics that spoke to my spirit in ways, to my soul. I find a lot of Japanese philosophy and aesthetic and art kind of, it's like a heart song, resonates deeply. And I'd embodied some of these practices in my work and in my life without having the language, the vocabulary in ways. And so when I encountered that image, I began to build a new vocabulary and a better understanding of myself and my particular way of seeing the world that at times felt very different than typical Western culture kind of seeing of beauty and what it means to be whole, I guess, and alive. And so that's what drew me to it. And yeah, and I guess, and honestly, even before that, like I said, it gave me the vocabulary, but even in the work that I had been doing also in ministry, it was all this very much of kind of like going into places that are fragmented and seeking to do work of like compassion and justice, and the work of creativity to create a new thing, to recreate something that was broken, systems that are broken, lives that have fallen down and needing help to kind of be picked back up and encouraged and empowered. And so, and healing, all of those things were just a part of my life already. But then Kintsugi and, the just gave me vocabulary for it.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. I just thought about Kintsugi and KonMari and how you're so right about how it gives you the vocabulary to kind of actualize something that you know in your heart that you value, but it lets you kind of put it into words that makes it more tangible, I guess.
Yes.
I know when I was practicing KonMari, I stepped back from it a little bit, and I was thinking about what is this fundamentally based on? What is the foundation here? And I knew it was a Zen-based principle, but I was like, what does that truly mean to me? And how am I interpreting it? And in terms of KonMari, I feel like it breaks down to just the principles of gratitude, joy, appreciation, and honor and love. And that's kind of led me towards creating a company called For the Love of Tidy, because that's what fundamentally KonMari meant to me, is just different ways of expressing love, and which is all those things: appreciation, gratitude, honor, all of those things. So this is just so interesting. Now I'm seeing the connection to how this is just creating a space for us to kind of define what we value as human beings, and these are just tools that we can use to express that.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
One of the things I just hear when, especially toward when you were speaking about looking at broken systems and broken people, so to speak, that how many similarities there are between our responses to not only broken items, but broken systems and broken, what we perceive to be a brokenness in humanity. And it seems like there's three different responses. There's, we either discard it, like, oh, it's broken, it's no longer of any use, or we try to patch it up and cover it up as though it never happened, which is, even in pottery, sometimes, we try to glue things back together so they, and make them look as good as new. But then the third way is kind of what I think you're expressing in your art, which is embracing the fact that it's changed, and instead of trying to hide it or discard it, looking at how it's an even better thing, whether it's a person or an object or a system, because of what's happened to it, which I think is exactly, it sounds as though this is kind of how you saw yourself through this whole process.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, I think for me, more so than thinking that, yes, and I think that I realized through my process and discovery of Kintsugi, and the more that I began to practice it and make art with it, it's um, less of seeing like myself as like this broken thing that needs to be fixed or other people, um, but it frees me to not be afraid to live, and that realizing that in living, the life is going to break our hearts. In living, we're going to do things that bring harm, and maybe that fracture our relationships with people that we love, or that we're called to love. That in living, things happened. But we can't be afraid to live, because I think sometimes I was afraid to live because of the possibility of breaking. Um, but I realized that when I live through these things, like life, if I live life and they come, that I can make it through. It's not going to be the end of me, right? Because a lot of times we break a bowl. I've done this plenty of times, and I throw it away and it's discarded. And I don't use it anymore. But Kintsugi has taught me that all of these pieces, like, you don't have to discard it. You're not imperfect. You're enough. You're still good. And there's ways that you can to kind of build the pieces and put them back together in a way, and that beauty will come because of the work that you're doing to put the pieces back together. And when it's done, you'll look back and it's like, whoa, it was a beautiful struggle. I just love that terminology of just this beautiful struggle, and beauty did come in the midst of this broken thing, because the fracturing is not hidden, right? The rupture is not hidden at all. It's still there. But it's the whole together is just this really beautiful thing. And yeah, so the practice for me is this a constant invitation to let go and to risk. And I use it, Wabi Sabi and Kintsugi kind of principles in my canvas work, as well as the work that I do and intentionally break on ceramics. I'm not afraid of mistakes and covering things up and adding and taking away. It's a freeing kind of principle for me, and I value that freedom, the lessons that it's taught me about letting go, and even thinking about other places in my life that need to be cracked open in many ways, so that beauty can come.
Well, this just reminding me of a quote from one of my favorite poets, Mark Nepo. And he's also gone through some life-changing trauma in his life, and had a brain tumor at one point, and fully recovered from that. But that experience, he mentioned how he said, he puts it in a way, I'm hoping characterizing this properly. I think he says, if you're either broken open or you willfully shed.
Yes.
So yeah, so it's so interesting how in the moment, it just seems like we can't see past what's happening to us, but ultimately we can put the pieces back together. And I'm just so inspired by how making this connection now with Kintsugi and understanding it a lot better, in its connection, of course, an extension with Wabi Sabi. And now you have found that expressing the joy by teaching others this process is really giving you a lot of joy. So we would love to hear more about your workshops and how the participants, break the pottery and put everything back together. How does that whole process work?
Oh, wow. It's fun, because I often, most of my workshops, I try not to, for the Kintsugi workshops, say the whole process. I ask them to trust the process, and that I would guide them, and their creativity will bloom and they'll know what to do, but just to be present to each moment. And so a lot of the artists at the table, or participants who I see as artists, they don't know, as they're creating on top of their ceramic piece, that eventually they're going to break it. And so that moment when I invite them to break it, because it's always an invitation, right? I don't force anyone to do it. And I tell them, if you don't break it, though, I want you to spend some time reflecting and writing on why. But most of everyone, I've only done one workshop where there's one person who did not break it. But most people do. And after they do, I guide them through the mending process and piece by piece. And through that, like in trusting the process and paying attention to it, because my workshops are very process oriented. Little nuggets, these little wisdom nuggets just come to surface and are spoken out loud more than any of the other kinds of workshops that I do. People, just realize, one lady asked me one time, like, how long do I have to hold this together with this gold adhesive? And I was like, as long as it takes. But I wasn't thinking about the larger metaphor, but wow, isn't that true with our lives? Or then how, like, some people, I find the people who don't want to break it are the most resistant internally. Their pieces break in the most, their piece breaks in the most pieces. And so, it's so funny how that happens. Each workshop, it never fails. And then to watch their neighbors who have already pieced their pieces back together then come and help them with their pieces. And then we sit and we look, and, I had participants like, wow, we need each other. Like, we don't have to go through the things in life that break our hearts open, or that break our hearts. We don't have to go through that healing process alone, and that it doesn't make us weak. One participant wrote, it doesn't make me weak to ask for help. It actually makes me strong and wise to be able to use the resources and the people around me, my community, to help me get through, to recreate something. And so, it's really beautiful. And then, too, some participants have found that for them, it's this metaphor in their lives of, like, just thinking through, like, what other parts of my life need to be pulled apart, unraveled, cracked open. Where do I need to pay more attention to, like, letting go and recreating something new and fresh? And so for everybody, it's really different. But at the core, it's the same of being willing to be vulnerable, and to trust that you are a lot stronger and braver and capable than you possibly believe. And I believe that about all humans, that we are more extraordinary and wonderful and powerful than we believe. And I want to, so I encourage all of my participants to just trust their dopeness, trust their gifts, and to trust the process, and to know that at the end, something beautiful will come. And it does. It really does.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I'm curious, that one participant who didn't break the pottery, why do you think they held back? It was a young girl, a teenager, and she was afraid of being broken. Wow.
Feeling a lot of pressure upon herself to be perfect, to hide the things that that she just didn't want anybody else to know because of how it may be perceived, or possibly even thinking that she couldn't bounce back from. And so she didn't even want to go through it. She liked her bowl the way that it was. And
interesting.
And then that too, for me, even her being able to write that and to share that was a powerful thing.
Sure.
Right? Because I don't know if she's ever spoken the things that she wrote and shared with me to anyone else, and so for being able to, that's just part of the journey. And then seeing other people around her, and she helped other people put their pieces together, and so, that was all. It's just that fear of the breaking that is so real for many of us, right? And a vulnerability, and trying something new, or taking something that's seemingly, perfect in our minds, and disrupting that. So.
But I have to know, how actually do people break things? Do they drop them? Do you have them hit things hit the pottery with a hammer? How does that I'm so curious.
No, that's fine. Yes, they drop them. Put it in a plastic bag and you drop it. Some people, though, break it against walls. I've done a whole body of work where I broke pieces on different walls around the city of Houston because I was thinking through a theme about how inclusive, how diverse Houston is. We're like
Mm-hmm.
the most diverse city, yet there are all of these social and political and walls that divide
Mm-hmm.
us in ways. And so I was invited to do a body of work around that. So I just broke it against different walls. So there's different ways that you can break. Some people I've seen, not in my workshops, but others break it with a hammer.
Uh-huh.
But it's cool because now, like when a mug of mine breaks, I don't throw it away. I keep it, and I have so many favorite mugs. I love ceramics and buy ceramic art wherever I travel. I tend to bring home a mug or a bowl from a place that I've been. And so now I don't throw them away and cry. I just mend them back together.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, I continue to see a lot of parallels in this process to the entire tidying event and how we do have to break things in order to grow or for joy to emerge. And we often help our clients figure out what beauty and joy and other just we'll help them set criteria for what they want to keep around them. And it doesn't necessarily equate to things that have particular monetary value or things that are important to others. It's really just about like understanding what that means to them. So I imagine that some of the workshop participants also may have some revelations like that through the creative process. So if you could share how it's get that whole breaking down to build up starts to impact their life. We'd love to hear more about that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there are a few of my workshop participants that are constant present in my life. Some people I just see that night, and so I can't speak for all of them. But some of the reflections that I've read and things that I've seen is like this constant willingness to kind of to let go and not hold on to things so tightly. Um, so there's one person I'm thinking about in particular who does post about Kintsugi and her process on her social media and speaks a lot just about peace that comes that she's gained through the process. That it was a meditative and very freeing thing for her, and so seeking out more things in her life that create that freedom, making more space in her life for freedom, for peace, for calm, and just thinking through that. And so there is this realization of like when through that process of just kind of the wisdom nuggets they take away, they do apply them to different aspects of their lives. And some apply them to a particular relationship. For some, it was a job that occupation kind of change that needed to come for more space of abundant, like life, joy, and peace to be real. And so mustering up the courage to risk and to let go, and not being afraid of not having all the right answers or knowing from that moment of the decision what will come, but just trusting that something good will come, and that you have the power to create that, right? That you are part of that creative process. So it's fun. Every now and then I'll get a little message or see something on Instagram that reminds me of just how they're continuing, like the table, which is not a one-time thing for them, that it's continuing to have an impact. And that's why I do it. I want to create space for people to tap into their creativity, but to really, I don't want it to just be a piece that they make in that space. But I am hopeful and want to curate space where it does it empowers, right? And it gives life for them that's way beyond the 2.5 hours we spend at the art table together. Yeah, so.
So it's so interesting. As you're speaking, I'm thinking about how it's been when I've worked with clients, and sometimes I've been so surprised when I have been kind of the conduit to giving them permission to holding on to things or letting go of things, and how they've responded to that. Sometimes it's just so gratifying to me sometimes to see the direction that clients go with that, not only when it comes to the organization of their things in their home, but also how it applies to their lives. And sometimes the openness and the vulnerability that they share with me is really, it's just, there's just no way to describe it. It's just so amazing. And you've talked a lot about that vulnerability that you've seen in your, in the folks that have been participating in your workshops. Was that a surprise to you when you first started planning the workshops and kind of coming to this, this path? Was it a surprise to you to see the reaction in your students?
You know, honest answer is no, because because of the work that I'd done at the art project before, and we used like the artist's way and some of the techniques that I use now in my workshops, I had already seen the power of art and curating a safe, brave, not safe, but a brave space for people to explore their creativity, what can happen in the lives of people when you do that. And so even though I'm living into a new normal, I guess, in a new path, I still carried that history, I guess, and learnings with me into this new path. And so I come into that space expecting some magic to happen. And I expect it to. And I'm always honored, and I could consider it a privilege that people allow me to guide them through that process, right? Because I am inviting them to trust me. And for a lot of us, we were told at a very young age that we were not artists, that we are not creative enough, we're not good enough to do that art is for someone else. And so when people come into my space, it's really brave for them even to walk through the door or even to sign up to come and sit at a table with strangers and create in the open. In something. And so it's I expect like there's this magic, and it's this honoring kind of space, right? And I approach it as that, and I trust that something is going to happen for each and every one of them, and that I may not know, and they may not know at the end of the class what that is, but in time it will be revealed to them. And I always invite the participants to do a takeaway reflection on the process. And so I asked them to name what is one takeaway from the process of baking, right? Because it's not necessarily about the final product that you have or the final piece that you have, but it's about the journey towards that. And so what is it you want to take away? And so I provide that space. And some people tell me and some people don't, and that's fine. That's for them. But hopefully, everybody does take away something, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that this is a journey, because that's truly what it is. I think we can get wrapped up in the idea that, once we finish tidying or once we create something, that's where everything ends, that it's a finite process. But really, that's kind of the inspiration for us as well to create a podcast around KonMari, because we want people to understand that it's really a lifestyle change, and it carries with you throughout your journey that never truly ends. So that's just so beautiful. Well, it was fantastic having you on the show, Lanecia, and we ask all of our guests what sparks joy for you currently.
Yes, what's sparking joy for me currently, honestly, it's all of the precious moments I get to spend with my life partner, Cleve, these days, because we're both really busy. So whenever we have a second or, time together, it's just so fun and life-giving. And then I'm also getting to play with my camera a lot because my studio got flooded in the Houston floods. And so I've been doing a lot of camera work, and it has been good to go back to that medium and have some projects that have really been giving me life. And music too. So those three things. I've been listening to a lot of good music in iTunes, and it's been feeding me and giving me joy.
That's wonderful. We have so enjoyed having you as our guest today. We're wondering, how can our listeners best reach you to follow up and learn more about the work that you're doing?
Yes, if you contact me through my website, larartphotography.com, there's a contact page and you email me there, and I will gladly respond to you.
Great. And finally, we always ask our guests if you have any parting words of wisdom for our listeners.
Yes, I think so. I would say that just to remember we all have the capacity to create and recreate beauty and struggle, and beauty from the fragmented places in our lives as we journey towards joy. Like I said, I've learned we are all braver and more extraordinary and powerful and capable than we believe. And so I encourage you to live.
Fantastic.
Great.
Thank you so much for joining us here on Spark Joy, Lanecia. It was great having
Thanks
you
for
on.
having me. Yeah, thank you.
To connect with Lanecia, you can visit LARArtphotography.com and follow her on Instagram and Twitter at LARArt Studio. You can also purchase her work online by visiting society6.com/LARArt.
So now we want to hear from you. Tell us your burning tidying questions or share stories about how KonMari has impacted your life.
You can find us at sparkjoypodcast.com and click Ask Spark Joy to leave a question or comment for a chance to be featured on next week's show. You can also join the discussion on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at the handle @SparkJoyPodcast.
Thanks for tuning in, and we hope your day sparks joy.
Thank you for listening to Spark Joy with your host, Kristen Ivy of For the Love of Tidy in Chicago and Karen Sochi of the Serene Home in New York City. Spark Joy, the podcast, is not endorsed by or affiliated with KonMari Media Incorporated. The opinions expressed on this episode represent the views of the co-hosts and guests alone and do not represent the corporate position of KonMari Media Incorporated or the KonMari consultant community.